Fab. So we're just going to give a few minutes for everybody to join. I can see some people already logging in, which is exciting. Fab. So we'll give it a couple of minutes and then we'll go from there. For anybody joining now, we're just going to be waiting a couple of minutes and then we'll get started. Okay, so I can see a couple more people being added in. Welcome, everyone. Start about 3 past, I'd say, just to give a couple of more minutes for people to join in. I know I always take a few minutes to join with technical problems, so yeah, give a bit of people a bit of leeway. Okay, a few more joining. Welcome. Start in 1 minute and then we'll get started for anybody who's joining. Fab, cool. So we're going to get started now, and then obviously whoever joins, welcome. Good afternoon, everybody. First and foremost, welcome to Spendesk's Valentine webinar. PS, I love finance, 5 ways to control business spend in 2023. I am Sophie Johnson. I am a senior account executive at Spendesk, and I will be your moderator for today. Just quickly, before I introduce the panel, I wanted to just go over some housekeeping items. So first of all, please feel free to submit any questions or comments or feedback you may have in the right-hand side at the bottom of your screen. Please note we will be answering all of your questions at the end. Okay. Secondly, this webinar will be recorded and the recording will become available at the end of the webinar. Over the next couple of days, you will be emailed with all of the information. Okay. So with that out the way, I would now like to introduce you to our panel. So today I am joined by Greg Stoddart, Dimitri Konstantopoulos, and Kevin Appleby. Greg, if you maybe like to kick off the introductions.
Sure. Hi, I'm Greg. I'm the finance director at F1 Arcade, which is a new social enterprise competitive socializing concept joint venture between Formula One and the management team at F1 Arcade. It's a bar and restaurant concept built around F1 racing simulators. So we opened to the public on the 5th of December last year, so brand new, with new sites opening over the next couple of years. My background was all in hospitality finance until COVID, where I worked for a startup for a couple of years, but jumped straight back into hospitality at the first opportunity in September last year. So yeah, that's me.
Fab, thank you. I know a couple of our Spendesk team have already visited the F1 Arcade, so that's very cool. Dimitri, maybe you'd like to go next?
Hello, yeah, more than happy to. Dimitri, I look after finance and accounts at a company called Applied. Got a few other fingers in other pies such as sales operations, general operations, even marketing operations. Just all the general stuff that makes things work magically in the background at a lot of companies. Applied itself is a really cool platform that helps you make better decisions around hiring, using a lot of behavioral science to kind of nudge you in the right direction. I myself have had a smattering of different things in my background, everything from stock standard accounting and finance roles in the early years, down to actually getting into direct sales and account management and all those weird and wonderful things over the years. So exciting to be here.
Fab, thank you. And Kevin.
Hi, Kevin Appleby from Grow CFO. If you haven't come across Grow CFO up to now, we're a community for finance leaders, but mostly a learning and development platform, encouraging future CFOs and existing CFOs to take their careers further. Just a couple of weeks ago, we launched a finance jobs board. Very different to jobs boards you might have come across in the past, because we're trying to search according to the stage of your career that you're at to try and make it easier for you to find the next role. Global job board. At the moment, there's about 30,000 jobs live on it. Go and have a look. But why am I here today? My past life was as a management consultant for PwC and various smaller consultancies, and a good amount of that work took me into the cost reduction field. So I'm going to bring that experience of what we would do as a consulting firm to take costs out of your budget.
Fab. Looking forward to hearing your opinion. So yeah, first of all, thank you everybody for joining us today. So we're going to kick off the webinar with a bit of a panel discussion. So we're going to ask a few questions to really hear your feedback and your thoughts. So to maybe kick it off with the first question, maybe for you, Dimitri, what challenges have you and your finance function experienced as a result of the economic downturn?
I suppose the lowest common denominator in all of this is just trying to manage your cash cycles better. That's been the biggest challenge. Getting the right net burn rate, especially for someone like us who's in the scale-up phase. Cash will always be the paramount KPI that you're going to measure your success against, because it just extends your runway. And as you can appreciate, from the one side, you have sales slowing down because as a recruitment software provider, in a world where people are trying to spend less and, let's put it bluntly, even trying to get rid of a few people because of the high overhead costs of staff at times, recruitment software is the last thing you want. So fewer sales equals less cash coming in. But even with those sales that we're still steadily making month in, month out, even there, a lot of customers are starting to push back and either refusing to pay outright and saying, we suddenly got a hiring freeze, down to more extensive procurement processes. So it's something that we first noticed picking up in COVID times, where people were starting to get a bit more panicky for the right reasons around managing their cash and having a better control over it. So companies that would typically just receive an invoice from you and just pay it outright, now suddenly, hold on, we've got this very defined procurement setup process where we have to vet this and check these details. So that extends payment quite a bit, especially when they suddenly kind of give you a piece of paper that says, funny story, we'll only pay you once a purchase order has been issued, and we'll only pay 90 days post-purchase order date. I'm going, but the invoice is already 2 months old. So that's quite typical of what we're seeing right now. And the other side of the equation, pretty much the same stuff that everyone else is seeing. You're starting to see costs increase, everything from direct supply costs to even salaries now, to make sure that we take care of our own people. But interestingly, in that, although I do say costs are going up, you are finding that some suppliers are actually offering more flexibility than they were before, especially around things like annual subscriptions, because what they're trying to do is make sure that they'd rather give some sort of concession and keep you for the next 12 months to ride this out and get that cash in advance ahead of time. So it's interesting times for sure.
Yeah, no, I think it's also something I've definitely heard as well. See, cash is king. And I think we did see it before in COVID. Obviously, yeah, we didn't really know what to expect. And I suppose similar conversations now is what we're having. So no, that's really interesting to hear. From your perspective, Greg, what kind of impact does having a robust process have in this current climate where kind of cutting costs or keeping a closer eye on costs is so important?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because I think the idea of, is a robust process a good thing? It's like, well, yeah, of course it is, right? But a robust process is something that is not necessarily an ironclad concept, right? I think it depends a lot what robust is, depending on the kind of business you are, the kind of field you're in, the kind of size you are, where you are on a growth curve, and one size doesn't fit all, I think it's fair to say. I think Sarbanes-Oxley, if it tells us one thing, it tells us that a robust process is not ubiquitous. So I think before you say, is it a good thing? The answer is obviously yes. It's like, what is a robust process for you? And I think that's something that experience will tell you. I think it's something that consultants will certainly tell you. For me, I think a robust process is one that gives no surprises out the other end. So I think if the numbers that you are providing to your senior team in real time, or flash numbers, end up being bang on the money, then the processes you have are probably right, or appropriate, or I guess robust, to use the word, right? So I think if you have them and they're appropriate, they get buy-in, they get trust from stakeholders. They're repeatable, they're consistent. They don't give those surprises, and I think the impact of that is looking like your finance team know what they're doing, right? And that level of trust is fundamental, I think, to everyone's personal career growth, but also to fundamentally that cash cycle that Dimitri's talking about. All of those processes, presumably, that we're talking about here, will end up feeding into our cash balance. Not talking about general processes, right? We're talking about finance processes, and I think the proof is in the pudding there. If it's robust, you get no surprises. You're able to forecast your cash out as far as you can, with the balancing figure just being customer demand or something like that. So, yeah, I think a robust process is a fluid concept, but you know when you've got one, and you know when you haven't got one, because when you haven't got one, you've got surprises coming out your ears. You've got pressure in all directions, and I think one of the tools to look at is go, right, what are my processes back to front, and where is the leakage, what's not going right? So yeah, I think a robust process does all these things. Now, I also think that Sarbanes-Oxley problem where you chuck in a process that well, in this case, the American government said, and it's one size fits all, you end up with an onerous process. And I think that's when you get huge pushback. Finance becomes the bad guy, because you're insisting on a load of administration that nobody can deal with. So I think robust in that sense. You go too far, you're in big trouble. You go too short, you're in big trouble. So I guess it's that. Yeah. What's that nursery rhyme I'm thinking of? What's the story? Goldilocks' porridge. That one. Yeah. You just right. Just right.
Just right.
Yeah. So I think that's my 2 cents on robust processes, really. That what's appropriate, what's correct. It's not something I could sort of lay out, but yeah.
Sure, I understand. And I guess going back to kind of Dimitri's point there as well, again, kind of at a time where cash is king, and obviously finance teams are looking to be as tight on kind of the costs and making sure every penny going out of business is necessary. From your perspective, how does having an efficient and reliable process in place help during these kind of times?
I think it's really that's really well articulated from that original question. I think if you have one, you've got forward-looking visibility. I think you need to match up robust process with accountability with senior management internally as well. If you have a robust process but people can circumvent it, or egos get in the way, or there's ways to get around it, I guess that's not a robust process then. But yeah, I think if you have them, you can look forward. You can go, my burn rate is X. It won't change unless something external happens. Everything internal says that this will be the answer in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year. If you can deliver that, yeah. If you're a scale up, if you're reporting to founders, you'll be invaluable, essentially, I think. So I think that would be the biggest impact that a robust process will have, especially if we're talking about cash cycles. You can apply that to lots of different things, though. I think you can apply that to EBITDA forecasting, to valuations, to P&L and balance sheet items that are of particular interest to founders outside of cash and if you've got a matrix of robust processes that where everything works, then you can look forward. Basically, I think is the short answer to that.
Sure, that makes sense. Kevin, Dimitri, do you have anything to add on those points, perhaps?
I think robust process is really important. A lot of what I'm probably going to go on and share with you is all about zero-based budgeting and things. If you don't have a strong budgeting process, then you're going to have difficulty controlling your cost.
Sure.
An awful lot about this is giving folk permission to spend, authority to spend, and the flip side is not having authority to spend, therefore you don't spend.
Yeah, sure, I understand. I think that does kind of lead quite well then onto our next question, which is actually one for you, Kevin. What does budget cutting in a time like this actually mean for you?
And it's interesting to reflect here. And we started up asking Dimitri, what are you experiencing at the moment? And my answer to that question has been very different to Dimitri's, because at Grow CFO, we've deliberately founded a business without having investors, bootstrapped ourselves, keeping the costs to the absolute minimum, and it's all about business growth. So actually at the moment, because we've kept the cost base to as little as possible, and we don't have all the pressure with investors of cash runways and so on, we're finding that quite different. But I'm contrasting that with the situation I found myself in the last economic downturn. And I don't know how many of you can think back certainly in the UK to 2010. At the time, I was working for a management consultancy that I'd moved on from PwC, and I was working for a company called Mouchel. And Mouchel were 100% suppliers to the UK government. Now, we had a general election in 2010. The Labour government was out of power. The coalition between Lib Dem and Tory came in, and overnight we got some huge austerity measures being put in. And probably half our business was the highways division. And we suddenly found that the total government budget for highways in the UK was somewhat less than they would normally spend with us on running small projects in a given year. Yeah. We were also doing outsourcing to various local authorities. We were doing all sorts of things, management consulting projects, and that was the division of the business that I was in. And literally our revenue line fell away overnight. An awful lot of it was selling people. Yeah. We got rid of people because they weren't being utilized, but still costs were there that we couldn't get rid of as fast as the revenue was falling. I got seconded at the time to the strategy director for PLC, and we formed our own internal transformation team effectively to save the business. To cut a long story short on that, we failed. And one of the last meetings was John calling the team into the office and saying, sorry, guys, we've gone through all this cost cutting. Sorry, today I'm going to have to give you your 90 days notice that we're going to have to let the transformation team go. But no, I'm reflecting back on that time, and it's probably some of my biggest learning as far as taking cost out of a business. And you can't just slash budget. That doesn't work, because you end up throwing away the good bits of the business along with the bad bits. Okay. Yeah. You've got to be very careful about saying things like, okay, we're going to stop training spend. Okay. It's a classic one to get cut. I've seen it probably over the last 30 or 40 years in a longish career. Travel and training are the two things that get chopped at times like this. But be careful. Probably travel, we're in a different place because we all stopped traveling over COVID, and we now know how to survive without traveling. Sure. Training, do not mortgage the next generation of people coming through your business. Be very careful. So I'd start with a very simple exercise. It actually comes out of probably any strategy piece that you'd do. You'd probably boil down to a piece of paper with 3 columns on. Column 1 is, here's what I need to start doing to go forward and grow the business. Second column is, Here's what I need to stop doing because that's going nowhere. So here's what I need to continue doing. Okay. Now, you've got to communicate that and then give everybody a reference piece, because it's literally every cost line in your budget. You should be saying, okay, what does that cost support? Is it supporting things in the start column, the stop column, or the continue column? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And you may even be looking at the start column and saying the wrong thing to do is cut cost. You might actually want to spend more there. Okay. So I would then go into a zero-based budgeting exercise.
Okay.
And you think of zero-based budgeting as something you do when you have the annual budget round. Oh, no, it's not. And going back to the transformation exercise in Michelle, and I had some great fun, myself and the strategy director. We went around every budget holder in PLC playing good cop, bad cop. I was there as the accountant, going through whoever's cost center it was and saying, oh, can you explain the budget on that particular line? What's in it? Oh, tell me a bit more about that.
Mm-hmm.
And John saying, yeah, and why do we need to spend that? And literally we were chopping lines out of people's budgets and doing it on that basis that everybody should have known going forward what the strategy is. Here are the things that we need to start doing because they're new markets or whatever that are going to save the business. Here are things we're going to stop doing because the market is just too tough and we're never going to grow in that area. We've made a decision not to do that anymore. Mm-hmm. Here's the continue. Okay. Mm-hmm. So that is piece one. Take money out of people's budgets. Now, the thing is, the money doesn't disappear on day one.
Yeah.
Quite often, we were telling people that they had to go get rid of people. Okay. Now, there was quite a process back in Michelle that you had to go into a consultation period before you could give proper notice and so on. So one of my jobs, and this is why process is important, was then to go back to each cost center manager and say, okay, you said 2 months ago that you weren't going to spend this. We agreed with you. Why are you still spending it? Okay. So you've got to have the cost center breakdowns, the budgets, the processes that tell you what it was you were going to take out and make sure you're enforcing it all the way through. So there's a challenge because as you go through that exercise, you know, everybody's going to have their own pet project.
Yeah.
Everybody's going to have something that they say is an exception to the rule. And I still remember the argument that we had with the director of HR when we told her that actually, no, we're going to cancel the graduate recruitment program. We can't afford to take graduates on at this stage. Mm-hmm. I'm contradicting myself here to say don't cut the training budget. But no, literally overnight we scrapped the graduate program.
Yeah.
No, and scrapping the graduate program meant that, well, what are we going to do with the existing people that are on this? Mm-hmm. What are we going to do about the people that spend a good chunk of their time training the people that are on this? Mm-hmm. And something that you need to look at as you go through this exercise is you will find that percentages of individuals end up in your stop list. Okay. Sure. So you'll have, say, an HR person that was spending 25% of the time looking after the graduates, doing the graduate recruitment and so on. Stop the program. You've freed up 25% of that person, but you still need the other 75%. So that person isn't somebody you're going to let go.
Yeah.
So one of the most difficult things to do is work out where all your 25% are and try and effectively use that resource. It's a very valuable resource you can turn to do something else that might be on your start list or your continue list or do more of list. And that is one of the really big challenges, is understanding where those parts of people are. Because you can't chop off arms, you can get rid of help, you can't chop off arms and legs.
Yeah. So
that's probably a longish answer to what was a very simple question. What does budget cutting at a time like this mean for you? But you know, if you're going to do it properly, you've got to do it in a process-driven way. You've got to manage it. You've got to take money out of people's budgets, and then you've got to police afterwards that money's actually gone.
Yeah, it makes sense. It sounds like it kind of highlights how important it is to know kind of where every single penny is going in your business. And it also sounds like, as you said, it is a challenge, but it's also an opportunity for you to become an even more efficient company by allocating people's times into, I suppose, the highest value tasks that they can be doing. Yeah. So I guess that does lead quite nicely onto the next question. What is the importance of kind of accounting for all spend and kind of cost spend and saving during a recession? Dimitri, maybe you'd like to kick this one off.
Yeah, I suppose in its simplest form, it's just your early warning system, right? It gives you the luxury for you to be more proactive rather than reactive. And of course, there's different branches of accounting that specialize in each one of those. You know, backwards looking accounting, which looks at historical accounts. So that's one thing. But then building up the processes, the knowledge, and the discipline to be forward looking as well, and having that foresight and understanding your drivers, your mechanics, your levers that you can pull to actually bring about these changes. Everything that Greg and Kevin have been saying, right? So it's not just about holding different internal stakeholders accountable for their spending, why they are spending it, why they aren't spending it even. You know, some things need to be spent to keep on maintaining a certain type of growth that continues, as you said, Kev, right? Sorry, Kevin, Kev, sorry. Whichever one. Getting very
I'll accept either.
And beyond that, it's also being able to be very transparent with external stakeholders, because if you're keeping good accounts, showing where everything is going and having robust processes, you can have robust explanations, and that builds confidence in difficult times where everyone's kind of like asking what's happening, and they want information now, and they want it thoroughly explained, no ambiguity, and what's the return on their investment. A lot of companies just want to know that. I mean, ultimately at the end of the day, one thing to keep in mind though when it comes to, you know, when you're accounting for the spend and making the budget cuts, is making sure that, of course, this is if you have the luxury to enable spending in areas that will support the rebound or building for the return that will come inevitably after this downturn. So there is a bit of a challenging exercise where you got to balance the immediate survival of the company if you are in such dire straits, but at the same time not getting rid of intellectual capital within the business that would set you up for success when everything returns back to normal. So it is quite tricky. Long story short, that's why it matters capturing everything in detail and being in the numbers and holding those people accountable that are responsible for that spending.
Sure. And I suppose kind of from your perspective, Kevin, kind of on that point, when you do have kind of real-time data that gives you that insight that's most accurate, what does that enable you to do, or what has that enabled you to do previously?
Well, certainly I was mentioning before, policing the spend. If you've got real-time data, it's much, much easier to police the things that you thought were going out of the budget that you're still spending money on. But I'd add another one that's not really about real-time data here. Accounting for all cost spend. How many times have you, as a finance person, asked somebody to give you a business case for spending money on something? Or how many times have you been asked for it? Okay. Now, we're in a world these days that recurring revenue is something that everybody looks for. Now, all your suppliers will have looked for that, as well as you've looked for it in terms of some of the revenue lines that you've got. Okay. Think about how many of those business cases that you might have approved in the past were about buying something that had a recurring monthly or a recurring annual cost. The day that you took out that contract or that subscription, somebody gave you a great business case. First place to look at this stage when you're trying to take cost out is all of those things that they gave you a great business case for 2 years and 3 years ago that are still in the budgets, still in your accounting lines. Go back and have a look and say, Is there still a business case for this? Because, the cost goes out every month.
Yeah.
Nobody ever questions it. It's just there. It's been baked into the structure of things. It's probably the very first place to look for accounting wise. You had a robust process for the business case in the first place, but you ain't got a robust process 9 times out of 10 for reviewing it on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably something that a lot of finance teams would resonate with. It's definitely something I've heard about a lot. You typically would go through those card statements with all those recurring subscriptions, and I'm sure there's ones in there that people left the business, but you're still paying for them. Maybe there's duplicates. So I think, yeah, I definitely agree that I think as we go into this cost-cutting period, those monthly subscriptions that are ticking away in the background are definitely worth looking at. Greg, from your perspective, obviously we're entering or just entered into a new year, 2023. Looking back and kind of looking at your last kind of year of experience of 2022, what have you neglected that you feel you should be focusing on going into 2023, and why?
I think for me personally, looking back at 2022, I'm definitely on the naughty list for a few finance sort of standards that I should have been well on top of. I think there's some mitigating circumstances when you join a startup that's not trading. Now the business I'm currently at, F1 Arcade, was a pre-revenue startup in 2022. By the end of next year, I'd expect it to be a multi-site, multi-jurisdictional, multi-territory rather kind of hospitality concept, which means all the stuff I haven't done, like documented all of those processes that I've built, make it very difficult to scale. And for the people that I've hired who will join me in the next couple of months to learn effectively and efficiently the processes that I've put in place. So. Sure. Documentation is tragically and boringly something that I have to fix, because I've got a process for AP, I've got a process for cash rec, I've got a process for forecasting, for budgeting, and it's all in my head, which is not very bright. So I think in terms of what I need to fix in 2023, it's more of what I need to fix right now, this second, before my financial controller and accounts assistant join me. So that's definitely something I need to fix. I think there's a couple of other things that fall on that list as well, which is gearing the business for scalability from a finance perspective. As a single site hospitality business in pound sterling in the UK right now, this business could run itself without anyone else. Are the processes I've put in place robust and scalable? I argue to question one, yes. To question two, probably not. Okay. It's a root and branch review of everything. It's almost that zero-based budgeting approach that Kevin's outlined, goes not just from a spend perspective, from a process perspective. What do we need? What do we not need anymore? What can we improve? And there's a lot to go at there. Ironically, of course, once I have a team in place doing the day-to-day stuff that I've had to do so far, that will actually become an awful lot easier. And there are lots of tools as well, right? We'll be migrating over to a NetSuite ERP type solution to allow for that consolidation to be kind of done without a lot of manual work, which will massively help, because at the moment lots of different builds in different countries on spreadsheets and not properly before. So there's lots of tools I'll be using to kind of to get that back in the right place. But ultimately, it's also a mindset that I have to admit that I probably didn't have enough of in 2022, of thinking not just about how do you set up this single site, which was kind of everyone's focus. Those five founders would just set up this site for success first. But it's very much my job to be thinking about year plus 1, year plus 2, year plus 3. So I think that's one. I think one of the more vanilla answers is to have a purchase order system, which is an embarrassing thing that not to have on a webinar discussing this. It's absolutely fundamental to controlling spend, and that's not real time. That's before time view of spend, right? That's what a purchase order system should do. So I love having real time access to spend and seeing what's being spent. What you don't see is what you should be accruing for, right? Your purchase order system is fundamental to that. So I've definitely got to get that in. But again, this was a company of 17 people when I joined and 147 now. So that's I'm not gonna kill myself over that one. I think more generally, I think getting the balance right between fixing what's urgent and what's important.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the time in a scale up phase, the urgent is the only thing you can do, but it means the important slips down until it becomes urgent. And so trying to find the right balance between dealing with the urgent and assessing the important in a more sort of philosophical sense, I think is probably the answer to that. And I know that's a bit wishy-washy, but it's definitely true.
Sure. No, it sounds like, first of all, it sounds like a very exciting time for you. And it sounds like this year is kind of where you're taking your processes up a notch to kind of get into that scalable phase where you're kind of, supporting now, but also in the future. So thank you very much for that answer. So given that obviously this webinar is exploring kind of 5 ways to control business spend in 2023, kind of doing a bit of a round table here, what would you say each of your key points, which are kind of audience can take away from this webinar, are? Don't know who wants to go first there. Greg, go for it.
I think Dimitri and I both unmuted at the same time. I think the one thing that Kevin mentioned a bit, and I think we all nodded a bit about, it's about accountability, and it's a cultural thing, and it's not just a finance thing, but ultimately the tone is led by finance. If you don't hold your budget holders accountable for their spend, then you basically render the whole exercise of budgeting and cost management kind of redundant. And it's a really difficult thing to do because you need the authority, and authority to do it is one thing, but the kind of how you exude that culture in a business is really hard. You see a lot of founders, I think, get it really right, and you see a lot get it really wrong, and there's a lot in the middle. And I think the best way to do it is to live the value in finance and make sure it's being lived elsewhere, and hire for it. Hire people who are accountable, make it part of that interview process and part of the culture. I don't know if Dimitri's laughing because he's
you've basically verbatim said exactly what I was going to say. So I'm just like, how does he know?
I think we must have gone through similar things. I think I've certainly been in a place where accountability is not relevant, and I think you see it with a lot of startups where teams see investor cash as theirs to burn. And there's a case of, well, we've raised X million pounds, so let's spend it, and let's spend it having a good time. Sometimes, right, is and reining that in is a difficult thing to do, and I've certainly had trouble with a sense of entitlement in the past, and it's a difficult thing to do to change mindsets. Ultimately, you get to where Kevin was in 2010, and everyone has to change their mindset, right? And it only takes a couple of people losing their jobs or major suppliers or customers to go off you to change it, and atmosphere can change very, very quickly, and attitudes can change very quickly. So it's I think for me, trying to build a culture of accountability is almost as important as robust processes. And I know, sorry Dimitri, sorry about that. I can certainly waffle.
It's great. This has been a great intro to me just putting the cherry on top now, because I can keep it short and sweet.
Go for it.
Entirely what Greg said, 100%. Gets my votes every day of the week. On top of that, anything else? Any more sprinkles I can chuck on that? For me, it's also about being clear and unambiguous with the team about the whys, because often the message gets lost with middle managers and too much corporate jargon and lingo. Be transparent to people, help them understand exactly why it's happening and how it's going to happen, and deliver that message with compassion, right? So whatever the process you're going to go through, whether you're just eliminating something, simplifying things, automating, outsourcing, whatever it is, help people understand what their role is going to be in that too, because that buy-in is critical in these harder times. Because ultimately, in the day, you're an organization, you're a corporation, so it means that you organize yourselves around a certain mission, you cooperate together to deliver something. And that's one thing that we're very big about at Applied, because of the fact that, going off on a bit of a tangent here, a lot of people when they hire for, they say, culture fit, because hey, we'll all get along, we're all trying to do the same thing. No. Culture fit is a bit of a misnomer. People like using culture fit for something like affinity bias, where, hey, you're cool, you sound like me, you talk like me, therefore we'll get on, everything will happen hunky-dory. What you're actually trying to hire for is mission fit. And if your team is on board with that mission during these harder times where you have to make cuts and reprioritize resources, it's easier for them to understand the why and the how and support you in it. And it follows on then to that accountability, where not only are you holding them accountable, but they'll hold you accountable too. So it works both ways. And I suppose if I had to throw in a random side thoughts from my sense in terms of what else could have been done better, and a hint I can give to people, it's something that we always neglect to do in finance because we're always trying to see how things can be done more efficiently. Sometimes hiring people sooner, even during times like this, actually does help you improve certain processes. So getting ahead of the curve, not letting it get to the point where, oh no, the cup overbrimmeth with work. I just don't have the capacity to do what needs to be done. You can clearly see it, but you're like, I should have hired somebody 3 months ago to help me out with it.
Yeah, makes sense. So kind of pitching the tent before the storm as such. Okay, so just to summarize there, so being transparent with your employees, making sure obviously everybody's working towards the same mission, being accountable and keeping your team accountable, and robust processes. Kevin, do you think you have anything to add as well?
Yeah, and I've taught zero-based budgeting in the classroom on a number of occasions. And you get a bunch of accountants turning up expecting to be taught accounting processes.
Yeah.
Very first thing that I tell them is, look, you're not here for the next 3 days to learn anything about accountancy. You all know how to put a budget together. You all know how to build reports. This is about change management. Okay, what you need to learn over the next 2 days, you're with me, are change management techniques. How to take hearts and minds on a journey. Okay. The second thing that I'd add to that always is the thing about people wanting to make exceptions for their own pet project, whatever.
Yeah.
There's one big lesson to take away. If you say yes to everybody's pet project, everybody's exception, you've probably achieved 50% of the target that you needed to. You've got to be tough. You can't make exceptions, and you've got to get people to understand that. But I just like to throw in an extra point that nobody's talked about so far. We briefly touched on processes. Okay. If you're doing a bit of process re-engineering, trying to make things better, and it might be anything like take some time out of your month-end close, anything like that. First thing to realize is that time equals cost.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, if you can speed a process up, you can take cost out of it. So it's worth putting that lens on some of the things you do. It's also worth recognizing that the thing that slows most processes down or puts most cost into a process is correcting errors. Okay. Now, have a look at where things are going wrong in an accounting organization. Now, you should be paying 70 or 80% of your purchase invoices automatically, because there should be a three-way match. You should have a purchase order, you should have a delivery note, you should have an invoice. If the three of them match up, pay the bill. Should be an automatic process. If you're down sitting at 50% and you've got invoices flying over the business for approval by individuals and so on, that is costing you a lot of money. How many people are coming back to you and complaining about things you've got wrong in payroll?
Yeah.
Now, correcting payroll errors takes an age.
Yeah.
Now, go and have a look at some of these classic areas that we spend a lot of time getting something to work that should be pretty much automatic, should flow through fault-free. Where are all the exceptions to these processes happening?
Yeah.
So there are places that, not by telling people not to spend money, but by actually putting a process improvement in place, you can save a fortune.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that does kind of go back to the 25% that we can start allocating into kind of the higher value tasks as well that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
It's definitely something that I've heard many times on Spendesk calls. Some absolute horror stories of how much time people can spend on the kind of the most mundane, kind of low value tasks like chasing receipts, for example, across the businesses. So yeah, to become obviously more efficient. So yeah, first of all, thank you very much, everybody, for your thoughts there. Now that does bring us pretty much bang on kind of the end of our panel discussion with 15 minutes left. So what we can now do is open up the floor to questions for anybody listening in. We can go through those questions with everybody's feedback and then we'll go from there. Okay, so just having a look at some questions coming through. Give people a couple of minutes to type. I've maybe got one here that we can maybe start off with. So question here, making cuts isn't a pleasant affair. Some cuts are easy, others more difficult. What basis would you use to differentiate between easy and difficult cuts? Great question. Who would like to take it?
I can share my thoughts on that. I think if there's an easy cut, then the chances are you'd be kicking yourself because you should have found it before. The reality is that if nobody notices a cut, it's something that it's one of those subscriptions that somebody left and nobody noticed when you weren't paying it. Ultimately, a budget cut, a cost cut hurts somebody in the business. So I think it's a hugely important part of how finance is viewed, how you deal with that, because at some point someone will be upset. You know, Kevin's ideas around pet projects are key here. Almost every cost base is someone's pet project. So I believe if there are easy cuts, you've probably failed. It's one of those indicators of a process that's not robust.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my take on that. It's short and sweet, but it certainly, my experience tells me that anyway.
Sure, thanks. And Dimitri, Kevin, anything to add?
From my side, no, go for it, Kevin.
No, go for it, Dimitri. Carry on.
I was going to say, if you had to boil it down to the lowest common denominator in terms of what I've experienced, so I put that little caveat because I know each company and industry is very different, but it ultimately gets boiled down to something that Greg already touched on. So when people are involved, where there's people costs, typically that gets a lot stickier because you're dealing with people's lives, people's livelihoods. You know, outside of that, in terms of like business costs in their rawest form, those are malleable and you can probably like move those around a bit. And the inverse relationship, unfortunately, there is that typically your people costs are your highest costs, and that's where you're going to start seeing some of the reductions, and it gets really tricky there. So yeah, it's a tricky one. I don't have a very good answer to that. I mean, I liked what Greg said about at the end of the day, that if you're picking up easy costs, those are things that you should have picked up on. And yeah, you know what? I've been there. I'll openly say I've been doing that even to this day, where now that I did get an accountant in who's actually helping me, I'm going, wow, look at all the stuff that's out there. So yeah.
Great. Well, better late than never, I suppose, and getting rid of some of the costs. And obviously, it's a good time to get rid of them. Kevin, anything to add there?
Yeah, I think the one that I'd add to that is that nearly every cost that you're going to get rid of in a modern day business, let's face it, not many of us that are on here will be involved in manufacturing these days. It'll nearly all be service businesses, nearly always businesses that involve people. You will be getting rid of people to take cost out, and a huge amount. It's not you're not just taking out people's salary. A person brings with them a load of IT, a load of other devices. A lot of cost is attached to a person. So yes, inevitably you will take people out, but the difference between a good cost reduction process and a bad one is how you deal with those people on the way out. They're not just numbers. They're individuals. They're human beings. They have a future. And the way you deal with those folks, the way you help them out of the organization and onto the future is, I think, really important. And probably the biggest lesson that I've learned over time is that a job becomes redundant, a person doesn't.
Mhm.
And you've got to make sure that everybody that you're potentially removing from your organization knows that it is not anything to do with them as an individual, that they've got to go out here and know that they are a worthy person. They've got skills, they've got potential, they've got a future ahead of them, but just not with you. It is their job that is being made redundant, not them as an individual.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
And whatever you can do then to help that journey along the way, do so.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very fair point. Obviously, yeah, we're all people at the end of the day, so I think, yeah, working together as a team to obviously get to the goal. There's another question here. How do you cut spending on activities and nice to haves that support team morale kind of during hard times? So things like team socials and kind of, team buildings. Greg, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's one that I've looked at recently. I think there's two sides to this. One is the HR and legal side, which is benefits that have been made available historically. When you take them away, do create an HR risk. So the first thing I'd say is when you take things away, you definitely need to talk to the right people about how you do that and make sure you're not doing anything that's ultimately litigious. Because I've seen that plenty of times. I think the most efficient, if you are going to do that and you do end up making that decision, transparency is the key. I think if you have a culture where you can talk through the impact of things like this on taxable on losses, basically on EBITDA or whatever it is your metric your business cares about most, you should be, in my opinion, sharing those numbers as much as is possible and showing them the why. This isn't because finance are nasty. This isn't because we're the fun police. It's because ultimately, if we make these small changes now, we're in a better position to extend our cash runway, to ensure that we are all able to push together on that mission. Was the phrase you mentioned? Mission like aligned, basically, right? And if you go on the journey together, then it's not we're taking something away. It's we're making a change in order to pursue the goals of what the organization is here to do, and that. If you get buy-in with transparency, you should get some buy-in with transparency, I think.
Yeah. No, I think employees do, kind of what we've seen is employees do appreciate the transparency, and it does, again, emphasize that you're all part of the same mission at the end of the day. Obviously, everybody likes team socials, but you want to get to that kind of goal as a company. Dimitri, do you have anything to add on that one?
Yeah, very simplistically, some people might see this as kind of a very brutal response, but we pretty much showed the team, and exactly like Greg was saying, that you got to show them the exact impact of the numbers and how that plays out in the finite detail. It played out as simple as, well, what would we trade for this? If you want to keep socials, you're literally making two of our team members having to kind of like say goodbye and walk out the door because you want to go and have a bit of a jolly once a month. So do you want to be the one telling, a couple of people in your team that because you're enjoying your time too much in the perks of the job, that they're going to be out of it? We're trying to make sure that, exactly like we said, we're all in this together, we're all in the same boat. How do we coordinate ourselves better to deliver on the mission at the end of the day, rather than just this is a pleasant pastime?
Yeah, so kind of linking the transparency aspect back to that accountability that we were speaking about earlier, that in reality everybody is accountable for those pennies that are being spent. And maybe time for one more question that I've got in front of me here is, how do you avoid finance being considered kind of the enemy, or I suppose the bad cop during tough times? I can see people smiling. I feel like that might resonate with a few people here.
I've just leaned into it. I've bought into the persona. Like, I've stopped fighting it. I've even told the account management team, when you need a bad cop to your good cop, just come to me. So if you're having problems with renewals and anything like that, fine. Right. I say that in jest, right? I mean, I do that actually, but the fact of the matter is that you've got to try and position yourself as not only just, hey, we're these people that do weird stuff on calculators in the corner and just run numbers. One thing that helped us a lot was we run a lot of internal lunch and learns. And when people actually understand what finance and accounting is about and how it actually supports decision making rather than just weird numbers that get reported to the government for tax purposes, or maybe even people think that far, right? Suddenly people go, okay, funny story. You're not just the person who's processing my payroll at the end of the month. You're coordinating a whole weird like maelstrom of things. And yes, so it's showing both the complexity of what's actually involved, but also in the most simplistic format of, at the end of the day, we're trying to solve one problem. Let's say that's making sure that we don't spend too much money, right? In the context of this call that we're on now, right? This is how we make it happen for you. And are you going to control it? If we're not here, who's going to control it? If we don't control it, this is the spiraling gyre that just open up and get wider as controls left. So a good analogy I once got told by a friend of mine. It's like going bowling. What finance and accounts do is you're effectively the gutter guards on the side. They're not going to help you bowl better, but they're going to make sure that the bowling ball doesn't go into the gutter 9 out of 10 times, right? They're going to make sure that, okay, cool, you bowl badly, it bounces off, you still hit some pins. We're trying to help you hit some pins rather than no pins. That's the bottom line for me.
I like that. I think I might have to steal that analogy and use that when speaking with other finance teams. Kevin, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, and go back to what I was talking about in terms of start, stop, and continue. Okay, you should be working with the business to come up with that list of what are we supposed to be doing more of, what are we supposed to be doing less with. Okay, you've got to be in a place where, as finance, you're not taking the decisions, you're supporting the rest of the business to make those decisions. Okay, and I can't emphasize enough that the one skill that most of us need to develop more is business partnering. You've got to be out there with your business teams. You've got to know them inside out. You've got to have great relationships with them. And you are not there to police them. You're there to advise and recommend. Okay? You are there to show them the alternatives. Okay? Present them with options. Present them with possibilities. If all you're doing is being there and saying, no, you can't do that, then finance is going to get a bad name. Finance is going to get the wrong reputation.
Yeah.
Or if you're flipping that around and saying, oh, look, there's a problem there. We can do this, this, or this. What do you think's the better option? Always try and make it move from you making the decision to them making the decision. Okay?
Yeah.
And that's the only way you're going to stop finance appearing as the bad guy.
Yeah, makes sense. So, well, thank you very much. I think that pretty much ends us almost 3 minutes to go for the end of our webinar. So, yeah, first of all, thank you, everybody, for your time today. Thank you very much, Greg, Kevin, Dimitri, for your knowledge, for sharing your insights with us. Obviously, as I mentioned at the start of the webinar, it has been recorded. So over the coming days, obviously, anybody listening, you will have the information sent round. You'll have the recording. And yeah, I hope that everybody on this call today can take away some of the key learnings. I know I definitely have. I'm looking forward to sharing them now with any finance teams that I speak with in the coming days. And yeah, thank you everybody in the audience as well for your participation and for your attending. And we look forward to having you in any future webinars that we do hold. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks.